Hi, everyone. Welcome to Happy to See Me. I'm Erika. This week, I am speaking to presentation coach and storytelling expert Priya Sam, and you are going to get some public speaking advice. But first, I will tell you what I was happy to see this week. So I got the keys to my new place. If you're watching the YouTube version of this video, you will see I'm still in my old place, so I'm in the process of moving. And my new place, I love it. It's bright, it's beautiful. And for anyone who listened to last week's episode with Mystic Michaela, and if you haven't listened to it already, I suggest you go back and listen to it because she is just insightful and amazing. In the episode, she talks about manifesting, and the way that she does it is she thinks about how she will feel when she gets whatever it is that she desires. Because really, it's less about the things and it's more about the feeling. So as I was looking for this new place, I would think about how I wanted to feel when I walked through the door. So I would imagine that I would walk through the door and it would be sunny, there would be natural light, it would be bright, it would be airy, and I would feel like it was mine. And I'd always think about how I wanted that feeling once I found a new place. So once I got the keys to my place and I went in on my own for the first time to take some measurements of the rooms, I opened the door and I walked in and I had that feeling. I felt like it was bright, it was airy, and it was beautiful, and it was mine. And I was so happy to see it. And follow me on Instagram because I will continue to document the whole glamorous and fun and not so fun parts of moving. Now, in terms of this week's episode, the show is called Happy to See Me. We really get to see other sides of people or parts of their experiences that we don't talk about often, but it's also really important to show the sides of ourselves and tell our stories in a way that is authentic and in a way that creates connection. So this week, I'm speaking to Priya Sam. Priya is a former journalist, a storytelling expert, a keynote speaker, and a presentation coach. So first we talk about her story of how she got into journalism and the challenges she faced as one of the only people of color and one of the only women of color in the newsroom. And she's honest about what it's like when you achieve that dream and you realize it's time to move on and figure out what the next dream is. And then we answer your questions about telling your own story and public speaking. And I will say, I have done lots of public speaking and I've been a keynote speaker myself. I've been working as one for the last year and a half. And I got so much good advice from Priya. And I feel like I have learned so much from this conversation. So I hope you will have some positive takeaways too. So with that said, let's get into it. Here is my conversation with Priya Sam. I hope you enjoy it. So what a treat for me to have Priya Sam on the podcast. Welcome, Priya.
Thanks so much for having me, Erika. It's great to be here.
You know what? People always ask me, did you make friends from going on Survivor? And the thing is, when people ask me that question, they ask me, I believe, in the context of, are you still friends with the people who you physically were on the island with and who you played the game with? And I always say, yes, I made friends. But I think what a lot of people don't anticipate and what I didn't anticipate was that so many of the friends I met through the experience were not necessarily from Survivor itself, but just through all of the doors that opened and all of the opportunities that came from me being on the show. And you are definitely one of those friends I met through that experience.
I am honestly so grateful for our friendship because, I interviewed you as part of my series with Fanshawe. But just the fact that through that interview, we were like, oh, we have so much in common and that we really became friends after that. I feel like it was such a nice gift for me too.
Yeah, and I feel like our paths probably could have crossed so many times before then. We graduated from the same program, which we went to classes at two campuses. So we did the same program that had a very small alumni base. And then you worked in journalism for many years. I worked in public relations. So I was always in contact with journalists, but I never met you. So somehow, even though it was always meant to happen, this crazy Survivor, podcasting, interviewing each other, just being interested in the same things, that's what brought us together. So I think it was meant to be.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Definitely meant to be.
Now, you do so much. In particular, I'm so interested in what you do in terms of public speaking and coaching people and telling your own story and really encouraging people to own and tell their stories. And I know that you have a lot of great advice for people in terms of public speaking, and we will get there. But first, I want to learn more about you and your story because I know that that informs why you are so passionate about storytelling today. So why don't we start with journalism? You worked as a journalist for many years. You worked on really big shows and really big outlets here in Canada. So what first prompted you to get into journalism?
I grew up in, I was born actually in a very small town in central Canada in Saskatchewan. So my dad's family immigrated here when he was 18, but he went back, had an arranged marriage to my mother, and then brought her to Canada in the middle of winter. And she had never been here before. And so one of the ways that they really learned about this new country they were in was by constantly reading the news and listening to the news. So I feel like from a young age, the news was always on in my house. It was always a topic of conversation. My dad actually used to volunteer at like a small TV station. We moved to Regina eventually. And so I had this interest in news and journalism from a really young age. But as I got older and kind of was being more thoughtful about why might I want to pursue this, one of my goals was really to be able to do stories about underrepresented groups, because as someone who was consuming a lot of media, I noticed, that especially at that time, there was an absence of people of color on TV, of people of color reporting, for whether it be newspapers, radio, or TV. And then also because of that, there was a lack of stories about a lot of underrepresented groups. So that was kind of where my passion for journalism sort of started, and then how it grew into what it was.
It's wild the impact of not seeing somebody who looks like yourself on TV and how that affects you and how that affects the way that you think of yourself. And I feel like now there are so many people who are so motivated to change that and to make sure that the next generation or the current generation has the opportunity to see somebody who is like them. What a lot of people don't realize when people get into journalism is it's not like you get the job in the big city and then rock and roll, life is good. A lot of people, when they first come out of school, they have to go and live and actually move in a smaller market and work for whether it's the newspaper, the TV station, the radio station there, and then they have to cut their teeth and make their way to the big city. So you had that experience. What was it like for you in a smaller place as probably one of the only people of color who was there getting into journalism?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is like the not glamorous side of the equation that we don't hear a lot about. But so I was doing my master's in Halifax, and so in Eastern Canada. And I know you have a lot of listeners from the US too, so I want to make sure that everyone knows. But yeah, so Eastern Canada, small city, and I started working at a TV station behind the scenes. So basically, I was a newsroom assistant. So I would come in, I would answer phones and get news tips from people who were calling in, or just transfer the calls to the right reporter. And then the other part of my job was printing scripts for the anchors and then rolling the teleprompter from the control room during the live news broadcasts, which, by the way, is a very stressful job. Like we had at that station, there was a 5 o'clock newscast and then a 6 o'clock newscast. And in between, during the last commercial break, I had to run to the printer, grab the scripts for the 6 o'clock show, deliver them to the anchor desk, and then get back to my spot in the control room. And I probably had like 2.5 minutes to do that. So anytime the printer jammed, it was like a disaster. So it was very stressful. But I did that job I was doing it for a while. And what I started to do, because at this point, I really wanted to be a reporter. So what I started to do was come in on my days off and shadow some of the other reporters who were very gracious and let me follow them around. And I would put together my own versions of their stories so I could practice, writing, choosing different audio clips from the interviews we did. And then I would practice doing a stand-up, which would be like the reporters on camera piece. And so then I would package that up and send it to the producers and ask them to watch it and give me feedback. And that's how I learned really how to do TV reporting. But a lot of that work was unpaid. And because, once I finished my master's and I was still working behind the scenes, it wasn't enough for me to pay my bills. So I was actually also working part-time at a clothing store and kind of trying to coordinate those two schedules. So that's really how I got started.
Wow. Okay. So it's the job plus coming in unpaid plus working at the clothing store. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And it's the unglamorous praying that the printer is working. and that's what you have to do to get into it. You did that for a few years. And then would it be fair to say you got your break and you got the opportunity to move to Toronto and work for one of the bigger stations?
So after kind of shadowing for a little while, I eventually got an opportunity to fill in for a reporter who was on vacation. So this is still in Halifax, and that I was like a week filling in. So then that's when things started to pick up for me more at that station. I got opportunities to fill in for reporters, and then I learned how to do the weather. So I would fill in for the weather anchors when they were off. And then eventually I got my first full-time job there. Actually, I was the news anchor and one of 4 co-hosts on the local morning show in Halifax. So that was an amazing opportunity. I did that for a couple of years. And then, yes, as you mentioned, the show in Toronto, I definitely feel like that was kind of my big career break because I was invited to fill in for a few days in 2017 over the holidays, over Christmas. And it was incredible. But I kind of went back to the local station after and was like, okay, I just had this amazing experience in Toronto. My family's near Toronto. I'd always... it's the biggest media market in Canada. I think that most people dream of working here, and having that little taste of it made me feel even more like this is where I really want to be. But it was just a fill-in few days. But then when I went back, not long after, I heard that the person I had filled in for in the national show was going on maternity leave. And so I applied for that job, and that was in 2018. So yes, that was kind of like my big industry break. And, I still remember getting that phone call, and my life really did change in that moment.
Congratulations on having that dream come true moment. At the same time, I know that when a dream comes true, it's kind of weird because you see the amazing parts of it, but then you see the parts that might not be as glamorous, or the parts of it that you didn't really expect, or they weren't really part of your fantasy when you were dreaming of this role and this moment. So when you have this dream come true moment, you get to move to Toronto, you get to work for the biggest media market in Canada. Was it what you expected it to be?
So I think when I got that phone call, I should say, like, I part of the reason I was so excited is because I was struggling in Halifax. I was one of the only people of color there. I was really fighting a lot of the time to get the stories that I really wanted to do on air, as in particular about underrepresented groups. I feel like I got a lot of pushback of questions around, is our audience going to care about this? I came in on my days off to do a lot of those stories that I really felt passionate about. But I think what was happening to me is that I was dealing with a lot of microaggressions, racism, sexism on a regular basis. And it was really starting to kind of chip away at my confidence. I kind of use the example of 1,000 paper cuts. It was like, when you have a few, you can kind of brush it off. But then when you're getting a new one every day, it's really hard to heal. And that's what was happening to me. So And I think there was a lack of allyship as well. So if I did try to stand up for something, other people wouldn't really support me. A lot of comments around, "Oh, you're so sensitive about these things." Like those were the kinds of microaggressions that were happening. So when I got this phone call, I thought that moving to a big city, a more diverse city, I thought it would change everything and be completely different. And there were a lot of things that were so much better. And I think this is the challenge with dream jobs and dream situations is there were a lot of amazing things. I met so many incredible people. But a lot of the struggles I was having in a smaller market continued in a big city too.
Wow, hearing you say that is almost a little triggering and almost a little emotional for me because in different circumstances, I feel like I've experienced something similar. And I feel like there's probably a lot of people who are in underrepresented groups who feel something similar where you believe that when you're in a situation where you have influence, you need to be brave and do the right thing and say something and advocate for the right representation. But then it's almost like you become an inconvenience or there's almost going to be consequences, whether direct or indirect, as a result of you saying that. So it does mess with you because you think you're doing the right thing, but then you're getting this result.
Absolutely. And I think especially when you are alone, like you feel, you're the first or you're the only in the situation, it's hard to explain to people on the outside what's happening because, even I think about my family and my friends, like they were just seeing me on TV every day and leading this seemingly like glamorous and very successful life. And I think it was hard for other people to understand that these things that maybe were happening behind the scenes were worse or were worth giving any of that up for.
I'm so curious. You mentioned earlier that it feels like 1,000 paper cuts where one doesn't hurt that much, but when they're compounding, it starts to hurt. Now you're a few years out, so you're able to reflect back on it. But when you were there in the moment, in those newsrooms, did you realize you were getting paper cuts at that time?
I don't think that I realized the extent of it. I think to be honest, I blamed myself sometimes. Like, oh, you shouldn't have said anything about that. Why did you even bring that up? You knew no one was going to listen to you. Now they think that you're, unreasonable and you're just creating some kind of drama for no reason. Like, I really think that I did blame myself and I felt like I shouldn't have been standing up for the things that I was in some situations. And it also, I started to question my own judgment too. So no, I don't think I realized it at the time. I think when I left, I started working in tech after, and I remember coming home one day and my husband saying, or he was my fiance at the time, but he said, "It's just so nice when you walk in the door now. You're so happy." And I was like, "Oh, well, was I like that bad before?" And he was like, "Yes, like you were so unhappy, and I just really, it just like hit me like that I had become very negative. And, I would describe myself as like optimistic and positive and bubbly. And I had really become, kind of the worst version of myself, which I see now. But I think when I was in it, I don't think I quite realized, I knew something had to change, but I don't think I realized exactly how I had gotten to that point.
Yes, this is definitely where things like the lack of representation, whether it's on screen or having colleagues, really can affect somebody. Because if you are the only one and you're the only one saying something, you feel like you're the only one feeling this, you can easily think that there's something wrong with you. But then after some reflection, you realize, no, I was in a fucked up situation.
Yes. You are so right. So towards the end, actually, when I was once I moved to Toronto, but I would say like several months after, I did start to meet more journalists of color and kind of confide in them about what was going on. And they told me that, a lot of them were experiencing the same things. And it honestly blew my mind. Like, I really thought I was having this very isolated experience. And there, obviously, it was awful to hear that we were all having these experiences. But it also was a relief and really comforting to know that, okay, first of all, like I'm not alone. And also this isn't in my head, like this is actually happening. And I think that if I had found that earlier, I think it might have changed things a little bit for me. But I don't have any regrets, of course. But that really did allow me to feel some relief and just to feel seen and heard by other people.
It must have been so validating to know that, yeah, you are not alone. There are other people. And once you got that validation from other people, and also once these paper cuts started compounding, was there a moment that was the turning point for you in terms of whether or not you were going to continue in journalism?
It was something that I think had happened gradually. So when I was in Halifax, I'd been thinking about leaving. Then I got the Toronto job and I, started thinking that this is going to change everything. And so towards the end of that first year in Toronto, that's when I think I started to realize like I should at least just start looking around. So I started talking to other former journalists and former TV people who had worked in TV, like who were doing different things just to kind of figure out what maybe my options were. And then I got really excited about a position in tech. And so I ended up getting a job offer out of it. And I had at that point just decided, you know what, I'm going to take this because I need a change. I need to try something else. And if I think I needed clarity more than anything else. And I just felt I couldn't get that while I was still working in television. So I figured I'll take this job. If I really miss TV, I will find a way to come back. But if not, then this will at least give me the space that I need to figure out what I should be doing. So I wouldn't say there was necessarily a moment there, but it was definitely a kind of a series of moments and something gradual. Actually, the one other thing I will say was I did start going to therapy when I was having a particularly hard time. And that also part of the process for me of realizing I just needed to get out for my mental health too.
Yes, we are fans of therapy on this podcast. And
Yes.
It's hard work and it's scary. But then once you realize the conditioning that you had around you and why you operate the way you do, I think it sets you up to have more self-compassion and to say, okay, that's the situation I was in. I was doing the best I could, and now I can move on and I can really figure out what is best for me.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. It was such a powerful experience for me going to therapy. I had, I think that everyone can describe a mental breakdown, like who's experienced one. It looks different for everyone. But for me, it was the situation where I was coming home every day and crying and I wasn't sleeping. I would wake up in the morning, I would cry in my office, and then like calm myself down, go do this show, go back to my office, cry, like just repeat. And it was almost, I think it was like 10 days to 2 weeks of this where, I feel for me, that was a breakdown. And the therapy that came after that really kind of saved me and got me back to a place where I could function and then also make this decision that, hey, maybe it's time for me to try a different career path.
I'm sorry that you went through all of that. Something that is your dream that you have worked so hard for shouldn't be putting you through that much pain. And I'm proud of you that you did the work and decided you needed to step away from that. I imagine there's probably so many people of color, women of color especially, who are interested in pursuing journalism. And probably it's intimidating for them to even think about getting into it. Looking back at the career you had now, do you have advice for people who are interested in getting into journalism or media?
I'm so glad you asked this question because when I left, I felt like what I want to do right now is put all of these experiences in a nice little box and put them on the shelf. And I never want to talk about them again. I never want to think about them again. I just want to forget about it. And then I started getting messages from young women of color in journalism school asking me for career advice. And I really struggled to think about, like, what am I going to say? I just left and I had all these negative experiences, and it took me some time to realize that what I didn't have was somebody who was honest with me. But I think there's a way to be honest and still encouraging. I think that journalism is so important. And I think having a diversity in journalism is incredibly important. Even though I left, I still support that. So one of the things that I started to tell young women who asked me for advice was this: like, it is really important. You will probably at some point face sexism, racism, some kind of discrimination. But the best thing you can do is to find other people who will have similar experiences and to find allies, like, right away. Like, find those people, confide in them, trust them, share your experiences with them, because there's so much power in having that community and that support. And what I found like, actually women in other industries too, but have found that advice really helpful, because I think in those situations, our natural reaction is to retreat inward and to not talk to people. So I think that's the best advice that I can give someone.
Yes. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, where if you know that other people are feeling this, one, you're not isolated. And then two, if there are enough people who are feeling this on a consistent basis, maybe someone can do something about it. Maybe you can work together and do something about it. And it sucks that it takes so long, and it sucks that it's so much extra work on top of a stressful journalism job, but it's worth it.
Yes. And I will say, since I started sharing my story, because I didn't talk publicly about a lot of this for a long time, as you know, I have heard from people who have worked at the organizations I worked at before, that stories, not just mine, but myself and the others who have shared their stories as well, have made an impact, and that things have changed. There's definitely still work to be done. But I think that's the goal now, is to share some of this with the hope that things will be better for the next generation.
Good. We need that hope, and we need to have more diverse voices in there, and more diverse stories. So it's good to know that there's good change coming from this. I want to ask, how do you move on from this? This was something that you worked for, you went to school for it, you wanted to get to that big media market in Canada, and you did it. And then how do you decide what the next dream is after you achieve the big one?
It took time for me. I felt so much of my identity, I think especially when you are a public person, as you know, whether I wanted it to or not, so much of my identity became tied up in my job. I would walk down the street and people would recognize me. And so when I left, I felt like I didn't know who I was in some ways. And that was really scary, because not only was it, going back and figuring out who am I, but it was also like, who am I now, after all of these things have happened. So for the first year that I worked in tech, it was a year of healing for me. I continued to do therapy. I also found this work environment where I was valued, I was appreciated. People wanted me to be my whole self at work. And it was so, it was so good for me. I was happy and being treated well. And I needed that, I think, to heal properly. So once I felt like I got my confidence back, I actually did start to miss some aspects of journalism. I never thought, I want to go back. The toxic work environments definitely were enough to keep me away. But I missed storytelling. I missed the opportunity to share the stories of underrepresented groups. So that's actually when I started my podcast. And I started it in December of 2020. So it was 6-8 months into COVID, I guess, and I had time. I'd been thinking about it for a while. And I didn't start it really with any plan other than this is a passion project. I really want to do it. And it was very empowering to be able to do something on my own.
And I want to ask about what you're doing now as well, because it seems like you have now reclaimed your initial passion for storytelling that you developed as a young kid, and you are helping other people with telling their story. So what do you do as a storytelling and speaking coach now?
It's so cool how I think the world we live in right now is so cool. Like, I mean, when I was starting out, when I was younger, it was like, if you want to do this, you need to like go work for a TV station. And that's how you be a journalist. That's how you are a storyteller. And I think what I realized after starting the podcast was, oh, there are so many different ways to do this. You have social media, you have YouTube, you have podcasts. And I also started to see storytelling in a different way, because in my mind at first it was kind of in this like, this journalism is storytelling. I don't know if there's a place for it outside of that. So once I started doing the podcast and, other people started asking me like, hey, after an interview, oh, I feel like you really asked questions that help me tell my story better. And I feel like actually my story is more interesting after this interview. I started to realize like how many of us have these amazing stories, but because they're our own, we don't know that other people can benefit from them or that there's value in them. So I started actually working with some keynote speakers who were sharing their personal stories through keynotes. And then that got me into working on storytelling in general with them. And then I started realizing like, oh, there's definitely more opportunity to share this. So actually, one of my coworkers kind of inspired me without even knowing it. Somebody asked her this question. We were at a meeting. This is still at my tech job. Hey, like, how did you end up working in tech? And she was like, oh, I grew up in Denver. I always wanted to live in New York. And so, I just moved here and here I am. And then after, like, I was like, wait a minute. Did you like have this childhood dream to live in New York? Like literally came here with 2 suitcases and no job and like just made your life happen in New York. And now you work at this amazing company. And she was like, well, I guess so. But like, I don't think it's a big deal. And I just realized like so many, especially women, we downplay our stories all the time. So that's when I have this workshop called Discover Your Story, but that's when I really started to see the opportunity to help women and people from underrepresented groups become better storytellers to like change their trajectories in life. It's really powerful.
Yes. And I know that there are people who would love advice from you in terms of telling their stories, understanding why it's important to know your own story, and public speaking, because that is a scary one for so many people. So we will go through Priya's public speaking storytelling masterclass. But first, let's take a quick break and we will get into it. All right, Priya. So what does it mean to you to tell your own story?
I think this looks different for everyone. Some people it's sharing a few social media posts. Some people it's doing a media interview, for a newspaper, a radio station, TV. Some people it's writing a blog post. But I think to me, the elements of it are like, why are you sharing your story? Are you trying, if you're hoping to help other people, and then also being able to share, I guess thinking about what parts of it you want to share and what your goal is in doing that.
And as you meet these people, you get the chance to ask questions, you get to uncover more of their story that they think is not important. Why do you think a lot of people believe that their story isn't that exciting or isn't that important or isn't worth sharing?
One of the things I'm realizing is how little time and space most of us have or make to reflect on our stories. So one of the things I do with most of my clients in our first call is I basically interview them because what I find is if I just ask you, what are the most interesting things about your life, you might think of a few things, but there are probably a lot of other things that other people could learn from or that are valuable that you might not see. So I think my job is to really help people figure that out. So I like interview them, like, what was your, I start with your childhood, like ask you about your biggest turning points. And then, what are some of the life lessons you've learned? I find in doing those reflections, that's when people can really get to the heart of, what their story is. And also I think there's a moment usually where, especially when you do it in a group setting, where other people start to tell you like, oh, that's really interesting. And I think it's really helpful to hear from someone else what's valuable about your story.
Yes, because storytelling, it's not like a one-way communication where it's just you talking. It's about that connection with people. And once you get to tell a story or your own story to people and you see the way that it affects them, the light bulb can go off for many people where they realize this is quite powerful. But at the same time, that's very scary for a lot of people. And I did ask the people who follow me on Instagram, thank you to them for participating, about how they feel about public speaking, and hopefully you can give them some advice. So to start off, a lot of people do not like public speaking. I asked, and 29% of people said they like it. 27% of people said that they hate it. And 34% of people just said, I guess I'll do it. So don't love it, but they will do it.
Okay, checks out.
And a question that I got from the listeners was, what is your advice for overcoming nerves for public speaking?
Yeah, this is, you know what? It's not easy, right? You're getting up in front of a group of people, especially if you're sharing something very personal. I think what works for a lot of my clients is I try to tell people, like, even if let's just say you're preparing for a presentation that's pretty structured, try to share some of the stories from it with people you care about first. So whether you actually are like, okay, I'm going to get my family together and do this presentation for them, that's a great way to do it. Or you just do it more casually, at a family gathering where you start to share and talk about some of the things you're going to share. Just getting comfortable with the content is really helpful, because then when you go up there, you're not like, oh, I don't want to forget this, or, oh, I don't want to forget that. It feels a little bit more natural when you've done it a few times. And doing it for your friends and family who love and support you is just a great way to help build up that confidence before doing it in front of maybe a bigger audience where you don't know everyone.
Yes, that repetition is good, because then you realize it's not as scary as you think it is.
Yes, exactly.
I also asked people what makes them the most nervous when it comes to public speaking. And the number one thing, which got 33% of the vote, was forgetting what I have to say. So do you have tips for people on whether they want to memorize something, or should they memorize something, or should they lean closer to winging it?
So I encourage all of my clients to not have a script, but to just have bullet points for each of their main points, in their mind. So typically, for me, most of the people I'm working with have a slide deck. So I always say to have clues for what you're going to say and for your stories in your slide deck. So rather than thinking about it in a okay, I got to make sure I hit all of these things, think about going from story to story. And usually when we're looking at a slide, we have a picture, for example, so that picture should trigger the story that you're going to tell. I do find when you are too scripted, it's it comes across that way. And especially if you're kind of sharing something that's a little more personal, people want to feel like you are talking to them rather than reading them a script.
Yes, it's so true. People don't actually want the perfection. They want to know that this is a real person in front of them telling a story.
Agreed.
The second reason why people are nervous about public speaking is failing in general. So, in your experience, how did you become confident as a public speaker?
When I worked in television, when I first started working on morning shows, I was having a hard time just relaxing. I was very nervous all the time. And people just kept saying to me, just be yourself. Just be yourself. I was I'm sitting here with 3 cameras and all these bright lights on me. How am I supposed to be myself? I don't even know who myself is in this situation. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I did was I was actually with my family one weekend, and during this time when I was trying to figure this out. And we were just having a casual night. We were all laughing. And one of the things I really love is puns and dad jokes. And I noticed oh, this is something I just naturally always do. And my family does. And we're all laughing at these lame jokes. And I was oh, this is me. This is something that's myself, who I really am. So why don't I try to bring this to TV? And why don't I try doing this on the morning show? Let me tell some funny jokes that I would tell with my family. And people loved it. like they were just like, oh my gosh, yeah, Priya loves puns, and like every morning I'd start getting messages from people who were like, oh, I like love your puns. Or even people who were like, oh my gosh, I hate puns, but like it's so funny to see you do this in the morning and funny to see your coworkers' reactions. And that's when I started to realize like I need to bring these elements of me that make my family love me, that my friends love me for, into what I'm doing in TV. And I do the same with my keynote clients. So I try to tell them like, just next time you're with the people you love the most and are most comfortable with, think about who you are. Like, are you the funny one? Are you the more serious one? Like, are you the person who's, are you talking about a TV show that you love? Can you bring that into your keynote? Like, so those elements that make you who you are with the people you love the most, I think like bringing those into your public speaking can help. And for me, it actually made me feel more comfortable too.
I love that advice because I've also heard the feedback of, just be yourself. And then it seems like the most daunting thing ever because what does that mean? Aren't I being myself? So I think that's a great way for people to really measure whether or not they feel like they're being authentic to themselves. Also, I know that now that we're on Zoom and so many presentations are happening virtually and often things get recorded and sent out to the participants after. I know it's very nerve-wracking to watch yourself. I have a hard time watching myself too, to be honest. But when you go back and you watch yourself speaking, how do you know what you're supposed to improve on?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's hard for us to see it in ourselves. Or we see like everything and we think, we're like so hypercritical. I think getting someone else's opinion is often helpful. I think sometimes too, you can do, so sometimes I'll watch something back and turn the audio off if I'm just trying to look at like, maybe I want to work a little on my body language or I want to see how I'm coming across just from my body language. So I'll just turn the audio off and watch that. Sometimes I'll do the opposite and just turn the video off and just listen to the audio and see if like, am I speaking too quickly? Should I, be changing the tone of my voice more? Am I keeping myself interested when I'm listening back? So I think those things can be helpful. I do think that especially as women, we are very critical of ourselves. So as I'm watching these things back, I also try to look for things that I did well. And like give myself a pat on the back for the things that I did really well. Like somebody asked a hard question and I handled it really well. Or maybe I did have some technical difficulties and I was able to make a joke and make everyone laugh through it. So I think being supportive of yourself too is really important in that process, that feedback process.
That's great advice because I think it's so easy to watch something back and to only think about the negatives and only think about how, oh, I said too many ums or there was too much of a pause or something. But it should be a habit that people should make for themselves. Let's all start doing it today where if we watch something back that we've done, we have to give ourselves at least one compliment and pick out one good thing that we did.
Yes, I absolutely could not agree more with that. Yes, we need to do more of that.
When it comes to telling a story, what really makes a story resonate?
As much detail as you can. Like when you're painting a picture for someone, especially, if you don't have a picture and you're just using your words, I feel like, so sometimes when we're thinking about a presentation, for example, we're like, okay, I have to get all this information in. I always tell my clients, even in a 45-minute keynote, you should have 3 points and the most detailed stories. So don't just tell me like, oh yeah, I was in my parents' living room. Well, what did it look like? Was it the 80s? Did you have shag carpet? Were you sitting on like a velvet couch? Did you have like an old TV with an antenna on it? Like I want to know every detail. And so I think, depending on the situation, obviously if you're doing a TV interview, that's 3 minutes. You don't have time for that. But I think when less content and more storytelling always makes things more memorable. So, and I think that our tendency is to do the opposite, to try and like cram in as much content as we can. And also I think for a story to really resonate, you have to have a solid endpoint that reminds people why you're telling this story. So even you don't have to memorize, every single sentence of the story you're telling, but definitely have that endpoint, a clear kind of summary of why you told the story and what point you're trying to make with it.
It's so easy for people to want to gloss over the details because they think, oh, no one's interested or it's not that important. But really, it's the specificity that people can connect with. And often it can bring out the humor, and people love when you bring out a very specific reference to something.
Yes, I agree. I mean, in my keynote, I show a lot of old photos, like when I'm telling my personal story. And I have this one. It's like me as a baby, and I'm sitting on this couch, and it's like actually one of those old velvety couches from the 80s with like brown and orange and white flowers on it. And so many people after have been like, "Oh my gosh, I had that couch that you showed in that photo." And there are like your little things like that that stand out to people, or that help people connect, or that remind them of, their grandparents or whatever it might be. But that stuff really does make a difference.
Really, because you never know who's going to connect with it in what way. And that could be the thing that triggers people to really remember and connect with your story.
It's true.
On the flip side, it's really easy to get very vague feedback when it comes to putting together a presentation. And one piece of really common instruction that's very vague that people get is, oh, make it fun and make it interactive. So what should somebody do when they get that feedback when they put together their presentation?
Yeah, that is frustrating, but you're right. Very, very common feedback. So a couple of things. So I think in terms of being interactive, I mean, it really, of course, maybe depends on the situation that you're in. But I love when there are opportunities for like quizzes, for example, and you can get everyone to log into like an app where they can kind of interact with you throughout your presentation. So if that fits with your presentation, I think that's a great way to get people to interact, and then you're responding to their responses. I love that. I think, when it comes to being fun, like for me, I do try to incorporate like my sense of humor and my like puns and jokes. But I feel like I've seen a lot of people lately just using memes, using like, and things that resonate with them. Like for me, I have two cats. I love cats. So I'd be like using some cat memes here and there. I think that's good. But I also feel like there are some small things you can do. Even things like repeating your main points, taking time to pause. I mean, I think those are things that just help your presentation to be more digestible for an audience, especially if it's a longer presentation. So maybe it doesn't fall into the kind of fun and interactive buckets, but I think it falls into keeping your audience engaged and paying attention.
Yes, sometimes less is more. And you don't need to put on a stand-up comedy show if that is not who you are. The authenticity is what's going to resonate with people more. I also do keynote speaking. I know that you have seen me speak once, and it was over Zoom.
You were fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I feel like that presentation I did, it was for teenage girls who are part of underrepresented or underprivileged groups, but they are just so brilliant and they are the leaders of tomorrow. So they are being mentored by so many amazing women like Priya. And I feel like I just went in, I'm like, when I was your age, I didn't know what I was doing. So here we go. And it turned out me being honest about that was what resonated with them.
Definitely. I know I was telling you some of the feedback I got from that. And I feel like teenage girls are a tough crowd, right? Like, but they absolutely got so much from your talk. And that two of the things they said after were like, she was very inspiring, but still relatable. And so I loved that about the way you shared your story, that you were very much yourself, and that you did talk about those moments where, you didn't necessarily know what you were doing, or you chose to do something because other people were doing it too, which is something we all do at points in our lives. But just hearing someone like yourself who has found so much success say that like it's okay to do that, and that we all have those moments, like I think it was a relief for a lot of them, especially a lot of them are at this age where everyone's constantly asking them, what are you going to do with your life, and them feeling like they have to have an answer. It was just so reassuring for them to hear your experience.
Thank you for saying that. I think that's also an amazing piece of feedback for public speaking, where you don't just have to share the successes. You can share the struggles. You can share the moments where you didn't feel confident or you feel like you majorly screwed up, because that's probably going to resonate with people more, to be honest, because that's so relatable.
Definitely. And I always say, you have to see the darkness to appreciate the light. And I think that when you hear about the struggles and like the difficult parts, that come between those successes, that's what makes people like, first of all, realize like how much of a climb there was and how much happened to get to that success. But yes, also to feel like if there are someone who's maybe in a difficult time, that like they're not alone. This doesn't last forever. There is like a light at the end of the tunnel. So I agree with you. I think it's just so important to have that balance and not to gloss over those hard parts of experiences too.
You know what? This connects really well to the last public speaking question I have for you. What do you love the most about public speaking?
I love that it can make such a difference in someone's life. I think when I left TV, I thought, I don't know. I one of the things I loved the most was like every day I would get messages from people about, oh, this story, really helped me or really resonated with me. It made me like feel less alone, feel seen and heard, have a different perspective on something. And I missed that because I felt like I was having an impact on people. So when I started my podcast, I started to feel that again. And now with public speaking, it's the same thing. It's this opportunity, whether you're in a small group or a large group, to share a piece of yourself and to help other people, whether they, get a different perspective or, they maybe they resonate with your story and they just feel like a connection. But I think it's the power of creating connection that I really, really love about it. And, also there's just like kind of this adrenaline rush that I guess like, some people get it from like thrill seeking and like going on like a big roller coaster. But there's something to be said for that element too.
Oh, the science is probably the same, right? Because you're up there and it's fun, but then there's also a risk because it could all go terribly wrong. Even if something goes wrong in public speaking, it's never the end of the world.
Exactly.
You know what? I have one more quick public speaking question for you. So imagine somebody is right about to take their step onto the stage, or they're right about to stand up in front of their PowerPoint and make the presentation at the meeting. In that last second before they open their mouth and start speaking, what is a piece of advice or a little piece of pep talk that you would give them?
I would say take a deep breath and remind yourself that you know exactly what you're talking about and what you're doing. I think reminding myself that other people believe in me and that like I'm not here because like I just walked on this stage. I'm here because other people believed in me and put me in this position. That is always like a good reminder and kind of gives me that like last bit of confidence I need before a big presentation.
That's amazing because I feel like it's very easy for people to think, okay, I have to prove myself. I have to prove that I'm good enough once I'm on the stage. But the reality is you have already proven that if you are being invited to be on the stage. So you are already ready and you're already worthy.
Yes, exactly. And other people believe in you, so you should believe in yourself too.
Well, Priya, I believe in you. And thank you so much for believing in me since we first met. Where can people find you if they want to follow you or if they even want to get your advice when it comes to storytelling and speaking?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm pretty active on Instagram. You can find me at Priya Sam. And my website is priyasam.com. So I have more information about my services and everything that I offer to clients on my website too. And Erika, I just want to say, thank you for having me. And also I just love this podcast and your whole concept and what you bring out of your guests, like these sides of them we don't necessarily get to see. I just think it's a really beautiful thing. So congratulations to you too.
Thank you so much. And yeah, people have no idea how much Priya has influenced me in this podcast. So if you like the podcast, also say thank you to Priya. So Priya, thank you so much. And I'm sure I'll be talking to you soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Priya Sam. I've been working as a keynote speaker now for the last year and a half, and I even feel like I got so much out of her advice. So I'm ready to go out and improve my public speaking. Now, I do have a bit of news to share with everybody. Happy to See Me is taking a small break. Don't worry, this is not going to be a hiatus, and we don't know if I'm ever coming back. The podcast will be back. The The reality is I record the episodes weeks in advance. So as you watch this, I will probably already be moved in and hopefully settled into my new place. But right now where I'm at is I'm in the thick of it. I am surrounded by cardboard boxes. I have a lot of stuff to get done in terms of leaving this place and moving and getting set up in my next place. So I just need a hot minute to make sure I can get settled and get organized. So I'm going to go off and I'm going to do that. But I promise you, Happy to See Me will be back because I already have some amazing things planned. And I will have some awesome news to share regarding the podcast when I am back. So stay tuned. Well, with that said, thank you so much to everybody who has watched or listened to an episode of Happy to See Me thus far. This has just been a passion for me. It's been something that I've loved doing so much. It's felt like therapy for me. I've made friends from doing this podcast and actually have gone off and hung out and become friends with some of the guests I've had. And I've been able to connect with all of you so much more. So thank you for supporting the podcast. Make sure you are following the podcast on social media. It's at Happy to See Me Pod on Instagram and at Happy to See Me Pod on YouTube. And you will find out when Happy to See Me is back. But I hope you enjoy the summer and I hope you get a quick break too. And I will be happy to see you when I am back. Thank you. That thank you was weird. Thanks. Love you all. Bye.